Hello and greetings. This is Train Time, the podcast, and it really is train time, even here in the United States. I'm Karen Christense, and I started the Train Campaign, a project of the Barrington Institute, in 2011. I began recording interviews with politicians and train activists in 2017, most in the U.S., but sometimes looking to projects in other parts of the world. I hope you'll subscribe to Train Time and also send me your questions and suggestions. And visit our YouTube channel, Train Campaign, for some great interviews and amazing historical footage. Hi there, I'm Karen Christense with Train Time, and today I'm talking to Matt Silber once again. And today is really Matt's show because we're going to be talking about Connecticut. And he lives in Connecticut and has been following a particular bill as well as other legislation related to trains. This was a housing bill, but has real implications for transit. And Matt has written op-eds for Connecticut paper. He's going to tell us about that. He wrote one, as I understand it, before the bill was, right? While the bill was
Yep.
It looked like it was heading toward being passed and signed, and then one afterwards. So why don't you...
That's right.
Yeah, so tell us that story for those who don't know anything about it, please.
Of course. What's up? It's good to see you again, Karen, and anybody who's listening. Thanks for inviting me in to chat about this stuff. Yeah, I've written a bunch of op-eds, and that's part of being a teacher in the summer who didn't get summer school lined up because I have a lot of free time now. So I have more free time to sit around and read news about, the legislative process here in the state and stuff like that. And, insist that everybody hear my thoughts on it or, as much as they're willing to read. But so, yeah, I did write 2 op-eds about this bill in particular, and any transit housing nerds, which if there are, any listeners are probably kind of adjacent, the Venn diagram between housing advocates and train advocates is, if not a perfect circle, very
Yeah,
close.
yeah.
So the bill was HB 5002. Some people call it HB 5002. I think it's a tomato thing. Doesn't matter. It was a omnibus bill. And, I'm sure maybe you can, it's probably similar in Massachusetts. The thing these days in the last 5-10 years of politics is the partisanship and the rancor and the sort of the incentive structure for both parties is not really to work with members of the other party to find solutions as much. So you often find that you have these giant packages of bills.
Mhm.
I mean, we obviously have I don't know how beautiful it is, but the big bill that passed in Congress and was signed a couple days ago, if I remember correctly, where it's just this monstrosity of legislation. And HB 5002, I won't call it a monstrosity because it was so good, but it had a lot of sort of progressive housing initiatives
Uh-huh.
embedded within. And yeah, unfortunately, I wrote 2 op-eds about it. One, after it had passed both houses of the Connecticut State Legislature and expected its signature and was
Uh-huh.
encouraging people to support it because I knew a lot of people were on
Mhm.
the fence. It was very controversial. And I shouldn't have counted my chickens before they hatched because then the governor vetoed it, disappointingly. So I wrote another op-ed kind of reframing for people. He's not planning on abandoning it wholesale, it seems. He's saying he wants to do a special legislative session here in Connecticut to revitalize it, reincarnate it in some way that's more palatable to more people. But yeah, it was very controversial, and hopefully it's not dead yet, but it's on life support for sure. So
Uh-huh.
we'll see.
I mean, what struck me when I first read about it was the naming of it. It's called An Act Concerning Housing and the Needs of Homeless Persons.
Hmm.
And that seemed to me about as bad a name as you could come up with the housing.
Yeah.
Because just comparing it, I have a list here. Governor Newsom signed something that was groundbreaking reforms to build more housing, boost affordability. Governor Hochul of New York, legislation to make housing more affordable and accessible. Um, in Massachusetts, it was a housing bond bill.
Hmm.
With that, that was passed last year. So there's a lot of this stuff that's happening. Uh, why why was it named that way? Just in terms of what kind of who submitted it? Who signed up? Whose bill was it? Where was the controversy? How was it? How did it get passed? Because it passed in both houses. Um,
Mhm.
so take us back more to the beginning, because
Of course.
it's
I mean,
yeah.
I unfortunately was not there when the sausage was made, but people I've spoken to essentially said, like, I mean, thankfully, what gives me a lot of hope these days is that it seems like a lot of states, as you mentioned, Massachusetts,
Uh-huh,
California,
uh-huh,
Washington, I think I shared with you, passed a really great housing bill, in my opinion, very outcomes oriented, very positive step. So
uh-huh,
you have this movement where people are finally kind of coming to having their come to Jesus moment of, oh yeah, like housing affordability is a problem. It's not just,
uh-huh.
somebody else's problem. And I think part of that is because you have people, like my parents or of the earlier generations who are watching their kids grow up and the sort of the the American dream, the quintessential American dream of like, owning your own house, getting married, moving into a house that you own with, a dog and a cat and a yard is further and further out of reach of
Yeah.
people, and not just, you know, undeserving, whatever, people who dropped out of high school or whatever. We're talking about like, people who went to four-year colleges and
Yes.
got degrees and so on
Yes.
and so
Yes.
forth, did everything right, can't
Yep.
afford it. So in Connecticut, I think you bring up a good point about the name and how like and the degree to which this influenced people's opinions, I don't know, but I
Uh-huh.
agree with you in that like when it comes to selling legislation like this, the marketing is very important. And when you
Mm.
market it as this is the right thing to do for a different group other than yourself, people, you don't like to say it, but people are like, "Well, I'm not homeless, so, like, why do I care?" You
Uh-huh.
know? And I think that's, like I mean, like, the Inflation Reduction Act, I don't know how much it reduced inflation, but it was a great climate spending bill. But if you called it, like, the green future of tomorrow, I think a lot of people would be like, "Ah, I
Right.
hate it," you know?
Right. Right. Yeah. And somehow people weren't thinking about that. It's a very, it's a very feel good title for s- certain people, certain voters.
Mhm,
But if you're trying to do these big significant things, I think you really have to make it clear that a bill like that is going to benefit everyone, and it really does. I know that there are going to be factions that there's always somebody who just to my mind doesn't see it, because to have people struggling for housing affects businesses. It's not just the people themselves. It affects how the employees you can recruit, the quality of recruiting teachers, recruiting policemen, and just quality of life issues in
mhm.
a community. So I've been reading quite a lot about California, because that's, in some senses, it was a model in terms of regulation. But even the Democrats and even the Democratic governor said that regulation 50 years ago, part of the early environmental movement, was interfering with the construction of new houses. So so what so this bill in Connecticut, 5002, it it was presented by whom? And then, how was it sold to the
So it
legislature?
was it was like a totally Democrat initiative. And as I said, like the inner legislative process, I had like, it was brought to my attention almost after the fact, like basically when it
Uh-huh,
had already passed the House. And I pride myself as being pretty on the ball with this stuff, but
uh-huh,
it almost got by me until I started hearing people complain about it,
uh-huh.
especially like in like more like kind of suburban parts of Connecticut. And this bill, I love it, and I think you would love it too for a lot of different reasons. And the big one for me was this thing called work, live, ride, or live, ride, work, or whatever. I'm getting it mixed up. But
Right.
the idea was that the best part of this bill was that it would basically give extra discretionary money, cash, to towns that rezone for density around transit hubs. So around bus stops and train
Yeah,
stations,
which is great.
which is why
Smart
like
and smart, smart, smart. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's why, that's why I reached out to you because for me, housing and sustainability, preserving
Uh-huh.
the environment, mitigating global warming and climate change, and the solving this sort of housing shortage crisis, trains are the key to all of this. Transportation is the key to all of this,
Yeah.
and that's why I was so excited about that part, and I think you would too. And unfortunately, there were elements of the bill that people didn't like. That was more of the carrot,
Uh-huh.
and there were
Uh-huh.
more sticks that were associated that I think people, especially in suburban areas, Democrats were not enthused about. So ultimately, it passed through the House, it passed through the Senate, no Republican support, period. It was a little touch and go in the state, and I hold high opinions of, voted against it. Democrats that I like because they come from suburban areas or not even fully you don't think like wealthy suburbs, places like Stratford or wherever that disliked what they felt was an intrusion or they felt obligated from their from what they heard from their constituents to fight against what they felt was an intrusion of local control into zoning, into housing and stuff like that. Elements of the bill other than work live ride that they didn't like. So then there's this big uproar and I can't get inside the governor's head, but I
Uh-huh.
think if I had to guess, Lamont saw this kind of NIMBY, no better word for it,
Yeah.
really. I mean, just it is what it is. NIMBY backlash, a coalition of the entire Connecticut Republican Party, functionally, and enough suburban NIMBY Democrats that he killed it because those were the suburbs that brought him to victory back in 2022. He really expanded his margin of victory between 2018 and 2022 on these suburban counties. And I think that's because, Lamont is a competent administrator. He's, a steady hand at the wheel. People like him. He doesn't get too involved in the culture war stuff. But he was afraid that if he signed off on something that the suburbs hated, that would be
Uh-huh.
that would be the election next time. So if I had to hazard a
Yes.
guess, you know.
Yeah. And what would make it palatable? Now, I was reading that from the point of view of the not the suburbs, but the Dem more left wing Dem progressives felt that it was reducing regulation to some extent, and that sector, that
Mhm,
segment of the Democratic Party tends to be very pro regulation.
mhm,
As in California, associating it with, in particular, with environmental concerns, but other
mhm,
issues as well. But in the suburbs, you get the idea. I mean, you get the nimbiness. There, people are afraid that things are going to be built. They're not going to be able to stop them, and they're it's going to lower their property value. I mean, basically, that's what it comes
mhm,
down
you
to.
know, and it's like, "Oh, well, this is like we can't demolish this abandoned pet store. This is where I got my first job in high school. It's historic." And I don't I'm being facetious, of course, but to a lot of people, they don't like change. And like you said, with the progressive portion, for sure, one part that they found a lot of progressives in the state found objectionable to the bill, HB 5002, was the ban on parking minimums. Are you
Hmm.
familiar with that, Karen?
I've seen a little bit about it, but I haven't looked into it. Yeah, let's
Mhm.
talk about because that's the car side of it. That's another
Right.
transportation aspect
Mhm.
of zoning.
So, basically, parking minimums are when towns basically say, if you wanna build, an apartment building or whatever, you need to provide for X number of parking spots, right? I mean,
Uh-huh.
everybody drives these days for the most part. For a lot of towns, they think this is the kind of regulation we need. Otherwise, the progressive argument is if you don't make sure companies build this parking capacity, they're gonna push it onto the streets, it's gonna become everybody else's problem. You really can't trust these companies to do the right thing. When they develop housing, they're gonna try to pass the buck onto somebody else. And that's an argument I understand and sympathize with, but I also think it's important to remember, like, the way I see it is that there are two kinds of regulations. And like you said, like the environmentalist movement is rooted in regulations' power to affect positive change.
Uh-huh.
But not all regulations are created equal, right? DDT bans are great regulations, saves the
Yeah.
bald eagles. I love it. I'm a big fan.
Right.
Parking minimums kind of have this double edged sword quality where what they do is They make housing more expensive to start with. If
Uh-huh.
a residential unit has to build a certain number of parking spots, the price tag goes up for the builder and thus the purchaser or the
Um,
renters of therein. But it also creates an environment that's hostile to multimodal transportation. If you have if you have to have these acres of asphalt across any
uh-huh.
housing that you have, well, nobody's really gonna walk because you gotta walk across a giant parking lot to get anywhere, and you gotta if you wanna ride your bike, you gotta navigate through, all these different cars coming and going who aren't looking,
Uh-huh.
and if you wanna, you know, f facilitate public transportation, well, it becomes a little bit less viable because now you're just creating these distances between hubs and access points.
Right.
So,
And you're
it's one of those
sticking
things
to
that,
a yeah. You're just
it's a
sticking to
regulation
an
that
old
means well.
model. Yeah.
Right, and it's sticking to an old model that is, well, everybody drives, and it's kind of like a chicken and egg sort of thing where people say,
Yeah.
"Well, everybody drives, so we need to make sure there's enough parking." But then when you say, "Well, what if what if people rode their bikes?" And it's like, "Well, we can't because there's too much space and things are too spread out. Nobody's gonna bike anyway." So, you have to kind of take that leap of faith of, "You know what? Maybe we don't need so much parking, so then it's easier to do stuff without the cars."
Uh-huh.
But it's like an induced demand sort of thing where we create the
Uh-huh.
space for cars. So of course everybody just uses it all the time.
Right, and that we know that happens with cars because as soon as they make I mean, there's loads and loads of studies that show you build more roads or you build extra lanes on highways and they fill up and are as
Of course.
clogged as ever. So, but I think I've read that in some places there actually ends up being excess parking space. So you have all this asphalt, which is hot, and a waste too. So it is. I can see that people worry about having keeping developers on keeping an eye on developers. But as far as I know, certainly in my town, every developer has to go before the zoning board, and there's lots of discussion. It's not like it would. It's not like make saying that there is flexibility on it doesn't simply give people carte blanche to do whatever they want. They still have to get approvals. Uh,
And this bill in particular said that towns cannot establish parking minimums for residential constructions under 25 units. So they could still do it for bigger
uh-huh,
constructions. And of course, saying you can't set the number of parking doesn't mean developers aren't going to. I mean,
uh-huh,
developers are sure they're motivated by self-interest. That's just the game, baby.
uh-huh,
But those same developers are if they think everybody's gonna drive, they're gonna think, "Well, nobody's gonna wanna live in my building if I don't give people places to park." So it's like what like we're saying before, it's like, as you said, half the time, the number is set pretty arbitrarily where people are like, "Well, I guess 2 spots per unit? Yeah, sure, whatever, that's fine." And these lots are dead, they're a waste of space, they lie
uh-huh,
empty half the time, and you realize that you don't really need to set it that that aggressively.
uh-huh,
And of course, it doesn't say developers can't build parking. It just says towns for a certain kind of construction can't mandate the minimum.
uh-huh.
So,
I've seen that one of
so
the things in some of the legislation is to do with rehabilitating vacant buildings and vacant
mhm,
spaces. In some of the other states, that seems to I don't know if that was a part of the Connecticut law. And
it was,
often
yeah.
often the I know there was I think it was in New Jersey, the reducing the minimum lot size to make it possible to build two-family homes within a neighborhood. So there are a lot of things that need to be done to have the thing always think about people love a lot of people love walkability. It's one of the things in the town I live in Great Barrington. People can park their car like I can park my car. I can walk to most anything I want to, and for me that's a huge asset. And people clearly love that, and to design so to design towns and design any kind of new housing so that it's as walkable as possible is going to be attractive to people. And so it's a shame that, and anyway, that there's a lot going on with legislation. What do you think would make a difference in Connecticut? We're going to link in the show notes to Matt's pieces because
Mhm.
this is not dead, and I think Governor Lamont didn't intend it to be dead, but needing to build more support because it sounds like you get
Yeah.
them
I
if
think,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I not to cut you off, Karen, what were you gonna say?
No. I'm just thinking that if it was passed with no Republican support, is there a potential for Republican support, or is this just a principle now? We do not ever vote for anything that's proposed by the other party. It's too
It's
bad.
that's
You
a
with the
Yeah.
train people I've worked with in Connecticut, it was interesting for me coming from Western Massachusetts, where every one of our legislators out here is a Democrat. But then I started going to Western Connecticut, and a fair number of people I talked to were Republican mayors and select board members and state legislators, and many of them were very pro train. So it was a mixed bag, which I was really happy to see, and it was an interesting dynamic, and that's where for me that was a hopeful sign. Now that was obviously before the pandemic. Maybe things have become more partisan now.
I do think that the pandemic definitely broke a lot of people's brains when it came to partisanship, unfortunately, and that goes for everybody, it's not like I'm pointing a finger at anybody. I think the pandemic definitely radicalized people against bipartisanship or reaching
Uh-huh.
across the aisle and finding middle ground. I can't say what it would take for the Republicans in Connecticut to support this bill, partly because I think there's been a lot of misinformation about it.
Uh-huh.
There's this, and the biggest part, and kind of circling back to your question before, what would it take maybe to get it off the ground and
Uh-huh.
actually working, is, there was a portion of the bill that basically required towns to set up something called fair share commissions that look at the information you know, regarding the housing market and essentially set goals for themselves for what kind of housing that they would build.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of towns, Democrats and Republicans, didn't enjoy that because they thought that the idea was that if you don't meet your goal, that it's a mandate, and as a result, you're going to get punished and you're going to get this and that.
Uh-huh.
And I think a lot of them didn't like that. And the degree to which there's like I said, like work, live, right is kind of a carrot. The degree to which this fair share portion is an actual stick or how toothless it is, I'm
Uh-huh.
not 100% on the ball about. So, and I think they didn't like it because of that. And I think they didn't like some of the things I mentioned before, like the ban on parking minimums. As you said, one big part of it that I really liked as well was that convert developers would be allowed to convert abandoned commercial property into small scale residential projects as of right. No need for extra permitting from the local zoning commission, no
Uh-huh.
need for public comments and things like that. And I think a lot of people didn't like that. I think they felt like, we deserve a say in what goes where. And that's one that's an impulse I sympathize with. My hot take, my retort is, listen, I mean, if you're driving by an abandoned CVS and a developer wants to turn it into housing, like, who are you to say
N
no? You know what I
No
mean? So,
kidding. I mean, there's nothing worse than abandoned buildings, and some places have, whether it's office space that because people are working remotely, there's all kinds of social changes and economic changes that mean they're abandoned buildings. The
which is just the nature of it's the business cycle. Businesses come,
Yeah.
businesses go, and we want to make it easier. I mean, and that's, I think, my sell to Republicans is that, like, look, you guys are the pro business party, right? Like, let businesses do what they do. Like, get out, like, stop the meddling. Stop resisting economic progress. And another sell I would have to them is just,
Uh-huh.
work, live, ride, and that density. Republicans really don't like taxes, neither do I, but Republicans especially don't. And if you look at the numbers, when you create opportunities for density and more businesses and more residents, the mill rate goes down. Your tax burden
Yes.
goes down when you
Yeah.
densify. It's pure math. So I think if there are Republicans who are open to these kind of arguments, I think maybe some of them will get on board.
We'll poke a few of our our subscribers. We definitely do have some subscribers who are Republicans, and
Of course, and,
we need
and I
you
hope that any
guys.
Republicans listening, like, can kind of see that this is a good faith argument. I know you want lower taxes, I want lower taxes too, and this is a way you can kind of see this bill as not being an intrusion on, local control, but instead, you know, unchaining of the free market in a way that benefits residents. So yeah, but again, I think things are so extremely partisan that you may find that the Republican support doesn't materialize,
Uh-huh.
so I don't know.
The funny thing, and nothing that you've said, you haven't talked about homeless or unhoused people. Is that that's in the title of the bill, but to what extent was that? That doesn't sound like the things that you've been explaining aren't really to do with some of the issues that we've heard about in California, for example, in San Francisco, the encampments and all that all that stuff. I don't know if that's so was that kind of just misleading in terms of the
I
content
don't
of
think
the
it was
bill?
I don't know if it was intentionally misleading because I don't know if you're familiar with the work, what was it called? Homelessness is a housing problem. Was
Uh-huh.
mentioned in that book Abundance, and it does posit that for the most part, the biggest contributor of
Yes.
homelessness is a lack of housing. So,
Yeah.
so I think by making it easier to build housing, we do make homes more affordable. You are going to see fewer people, pushed out of their homes, as has happened in California for so long. And there were other elements of the bill too that were more focused on the dignity of unhoused people. Like there was a ban on hostile architecture, for example. Like making
Uh,
like sort of like underpasses, for example, spiky or whatever it is, so unhoused people can use it.
ah,
But yeah,
uh-huh.
I mean, I think the decision to center the bill's impact on homelessness was an interesting choice, maybe.
Yeah.
It seems like the bill benefits more people than just the
Yeah,
unhoused.
I would say affordability for all would be a
Mhm.
better catchphrase or something along those lines.
Yeah,
Um,
probably.
yeah. So, okay, well, what I'm gonna do in the show notes, folks, is I'm gonna link to Matt's 2 articles and to some of the other legislation in our region and this recent bill that Governor Newsom signed in California, because it's really quite interesting that there's a real problem there. I would like to, it's fascinating to me when I looked at all of them, the ways in which they're similar and the ways in which they're different. I wonder what the best model is, and I hope that the people who are, reworking 5002 are looking at the best practice because these are I mean, it's obviously a problem that's common to many parts of the country and to other places in the world as well. So, we
Yeah,
need
I definitely
solutions.
agree, and I mean, if there are any authors or legislators, working on 5002 right now, there's no shortage of case studies,
Yeah,
to find out what will work, so for sure. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm excited, I'm holding out hope that, like, we'll be able to get something done that's, more amenable to everybody, and like I said, I mean, I reached out to you initially because I was excited about the opportunities afforded by reactivating rail lines, and if we get work, live, ride passed, I mean, that's just one more ball rolling on that, where all of a sudden towns are like, "Oh, snap, we can get extra money if we set up a station here, like, let's do it." Like, and those sort of incentives,
Mm.
I think they're just
Let's
they're
do
they're
let's
interconnected.
do another show about that in particular and look for some similar
Yeah, that's a
examples.
great idea. Yeah.
Because that is, I think, something that we could be pitching quite strongly, and that would be useful in each of the states that we're active in.
Of
Alright,
course,
well,
yeah, no doubt.
yeah. Well, thank you, Matt. Have a great, you're going where are you going? You're going to New Orleans. Oh
Yes,
my
I am.
god.
Should be fun. Yeah.
Oh, you're
Have you ever
so
been?
lucky. Yeah, yeah, I have. once or
Mhm.
twice, but before that, a long time ago. And I have friends there and friends who go there, so I hear about it pretty often. I keep thinking, must get
Mhm. I love it. I went for the first time last February for my father-in-law's birthday. I'm now going down again for my sister's birthday. So we're gonna have a great time. I love it. Such a cool city, so much history, so much fun.
and great food, great music. It's yeah, it's a
Terrific food,
super
terrific
place.
music,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
sure. So I'm really stoked, for sure. So
Okay,
you've
well,
been working on a book too, right?
yeah, I'm staying put. I have to finish The Great Good Place. So yeah, I'm obsessed with third places right now. And I picked up.
I when you're in the zone, you just gotta work. You gotta finish it.
Yep, yep.
I
So
get it.
no summer off for me after my trip to China.
Okay.
Now I'm now head, nose to the grindstone. All right,
For
but
sure,
great to
for
talk
sure.
to you. We'll talk soon, and let's think about these good models that we want to talk about.
Sounds terrific. All right,
So
great. Talk
thanks
soon,
very
Karen.
much. Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye bye. Thank you for joining us at Train Time. Be sure to subscribe to our Substack newsletter. And remember, you can get our podcasts on your favorite player, including Apple and Spotify, as well as on our YouTube channel.